Doug Bischoff, man, it is so good to have you. You're my first podcast guest. Man, thank you for being here. Who are you? What do you do? What's your background? Why do you do what you do?
Well, that's a lot. Well, Mark, thank you. I am very honored to be your first guest for you and your mom to hear. So we're excited. Well, I'm the next gen minister at the Loop here at Houston's First Baptist Church. And so student ministry for 26 years. I've been doing next gen for the last 9. I just love kids. I mean, that's what it boils down to is I love kids, particularly that age of 12 to 18. The adolescent age is just one that really, really hits me. My wife and I have just come through 10 years of parenting teenagers ourselves. And so now our kids are 22, 21, 19, and 18. And so we just got our youngest into the 18-year-old, launched out of high school into college. And so we found that we've entered this next stage where it's actually scarier than the teenage stage. I didn't think that was possible, but it is. And so
I'd love to hear more on that.
Well, it's interesting because when your kids get to be young adults, you find out if the things you taught them as teenagers were effective or not. So it's kind of like the final exam for parenting. You get to hear if what you did well and what you didn't do well. But the good news is God makes up for all of our mistakes. And so at the end of the day, we do the best we can, but we know that God's going to take care of our kids and do more with them than we could ever do. So I always see that as a safety net for me, which is good because I make a lot of mistakes.
Join the club. Okay, so you recently gave a talk at a student ministry event, kind of a weekend D-Now situation, to a group of parents of teenagers, and that talk was entitled "Should I Make My Kids Go to Church?" And I got kind of the brief version, but I really wanted you to kind of expand that out here for anyone that's listening, because that is a game changer question. I think one of the things is I've learned over my learning through research is that we're keeping a lot of our middle schoolers. High school, you see that major drop off, whether that comes with the advent of driver's license or just that age group. And then college age, we're really seeing a significant drop off. And so I think one of those primary questions my younger parents or parents of younger students are asking is, do I make my kid go to church? What's the situation? So I would love for you just to kind of dive into that.
Yeah, I've been asked this question probably more than any question in 35 years of ministry. How and what I do in relation to church with my son or daughter is kind of the focus of every parent, I think. And now when you add to this, the research is showing how kids are dropping off and leaving the faith, and some are coming back and some aren't coming back. Parents are even more sensitive to the fact of how do I navigate this road of making my kid go to church or not making them go to church. The thing that I told parents was this: the first question we need to ask ourselves is, why do we go to church? We can't make our kids go to something that we don't even know why we're doing.
It's a good point.
So I think it's important. And I think in the church in general, we've just not answered this question very well the last few years. Our best answer is a horrible answer. And that's, well, because you're supposed to.
Yeah.
Well, that's awful. And no teenager loves that answer, because I said so is like the worst thing ever. So that's not what we want to say. But I think with moms and dads, we have to stop and think, why are we even going to church? Why did God create the church? God created the family in Genesis 1. He created the church as we know it, the New Testament church, in Matthew chapter 16. And so what was his intention? What was he after? And I think the fact that those are the only two institutions that God really created. Government is not a creation of God. It's a man-made creation, endorsed, if you will, by God. We won't get into all the Old Testament survey, but really what that leaves us is family. And we need to see church as family, that we come to church because that's where our family is. That's where our brothers and sisters in Christ are. And the great thing about spiritual family is we don't even have to know them to be family. we can walk in, and because we have that in common, there's a bond between us. And as I mentioned to you the other day, one of the things I did share with you is, it would be really silly to say to someone, man, I love my wife, I love my kids, but I think this year I'm going to move out of the house and I'm just going to focus on the PTA.
Yeah.
You go, what a horrible dad you are, what a horrible husband you are. And yet sometimes as church people in the family of God, we make those kinds of statements. And we say, I'm not going to really be at church much this year because I'm going to focus on the PTA or the Kiwanis or the Little League or whatever. And I get it. We were a part of PTA. We were a part of Little League. You want to be involved in those things, but at the end of the day, your family is primary.
It's good.
So why do we go to church? Because that's where our family is. And we need that family. In the current culture, as parents parenting teenagers, it can be very scary. I mean, it's always been scary, let's be honest, to parent a kid. But in these days and age, it can be a little scarier. And so we need that family around us to encourage us and to strengthen us. And I think it's where we grow in the Lord. And so the first question is really why we go to church. And then once we do that, we're able as parents to really lean into the ways to encourage them to go to church. I was talking to a dad at our campus a couple of weeks ago, and he said, I really want to plug my son in to church. He was very involved before the pandemic. He's not involved now. What should I do? And I said, well, we have this great weekend event that just happened. Did he come? Well, no. Well, that was a missed opportunity. He goes, right. Yeah, I know. I probably should have encouraged him to. And I think that's one of the great answers for parents is, as parents, we're preparing our kids to be adults. And that means we encourage them to do the hard things. We've got to encourage them to do the hard things. And, none of us walk into a room of people that we're not comfortable with and instantly get comfortable with them. Even the most extroverted kids have to warm up. They have to build relationship. And so our kids are that way too. And if they're unplugged, then we need to come and encourage them to say, jump in, take the chance. And
I mean, for Pete's sake, there, if you let your kid decide what they're going to eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day, it's going to be bad news. It's going to be poor nutrition and all that. If you let them decide, if you don't want to go to school, that's fine. Just stay home, play video games, and they would take that choice. My kids, I don't know about you, my kids would take that option. And so their brains aren't fully developed. And so that's good. So in a sense, we still have to parent. I think maybe the rub is because they're older, we think, well, we got to give them a little more freedom and all that kind of stuff. But maybe what parents of teenagers need to hear is hold on to some of those reins, especially the most important thing. God's given us this thing in Genesis 1. And then in Matthew 16, you got the family, you've got the church, and those two are very important. And so maybe you provide fewer options. I mean, in a sense, so you would be an advocate. I mean, as long as we know, why we go to church, why church matters, why gathering matters, that God has given us this institution, that we should hang on to that. How did you come to that conclusion? What has led you, all the conversations and study and research, I'm sure. What are you thinking? What are your thoughts there?
Well, there's this thought among parents, and I get it. I felt this too, is that the things I make my son or daughter do, they're naturally in their rebelliousness not going to want to do. Mm-hmm. So if I make my child go to church, that's going to cause them to be one of those kids who rebels, and when they get to college, they leave church. And the problem with that is the opposite is true. Mm-hmm. Kids do what we do. And so the problem is not what we say, the problem is what we do. And so if a parent values church, then, and their kids are seeing that, then yes, absolutely, you should make your child go to church, because you're just reinforcing your value. The best research tells us that kids are going to turn out to look like us spiritually. I mean, at the end of the day, they're going to look like us. And so if we're valuing church, we should reinforce that by saying, look, church is a part of who we are, and we're going to go to church. I was talking to our pastor yesterday, and we were talking about this subject, and he made a very casual comment, but it was very powerful. He said, in my house, it's just not a question. We don't have the discussion because it's just who we are. Now, he can say that because I know that church isn't just a job for him. He's reinforced that value of church to his family. And so his kids receive that and they get it. You know, a lot of us millennials and older, we grew up in the should haves. In other words, you should go to church. You do it because you're supposed to.
Sure.
If we keep doing that, our kids will, excuse me, will grow up with the shoulds as well, but their reaction to that will be differently. I should go to church, but that's not authentic, so I'm not going to. And so that's why I think we see so many millennials and now Gen Zs that are leaving the church, is because the shoulds just don't make it anymore for them. And so I should go to church is so inauthentic, it pushes them away from it. And so at the end of the day, what brought me to that is, does a mom or dad really value church? And if they do, then yeah, you should encourage your child to go to church. And if you don't, you should learn to value church. You know what I mean? You don't go, no, you don't have to go, but it's, I as a parent have to be what I want my child to be. And so that's where we get there.
Should I make my kids go to church is actually step 2 in that conversation. Step 1 is, do I value it personally? That's good. Right. That's good. Well, okay. So, I think we've all, if you've been involved in student ministry for any length of time, I think we talked about this the other day. Some of the best parents I've ever witnessed have teenagers that end up walking away from the faith. Some of the maybe least connected spiritually parents end up having students that are, all-stars, giving their life away for the mission of God. And so there's really no code, there's no equation, right? I think you said something like you've got it's kind of like the bell curve. You've got these kids on the edge that have, disconnected parents, but they turn out to be missionaries. Missionaries. Why is that the first one? They're the all-stars of Christianity, right?
Right.
And then you've got, parents who are, super focused, super connected, and have kids that are but by and large, would you, and maybe you can back me up on this, would you agree that medium middle in the bell curve is, man, if you value church, if you teach your kids to value church, if you teach your kids to value God and his authority and scripture, that by and large, a lot of that gets rooted in and anchored in, and that it's not an equation, but we do start to see some connection in that medium middle, or the other way. If you're disconnected, if you're going to put, Kiwanis or sports, for us it is sports. I think that's maybe the biggest thing. It's all extracurriculars, but Sundays and Wednesdays are practice and game days now. And so if they take the option to do sport, they're going to play the sport and they're going to miss out. And so there is, again, on both sides, that culture at home of, do we value this or not? Do you see that bell curve in your history? Kind of, there's a little bit on the other edges.
I think you're exactly right. The problem is, it's those small tails of the bell curve, like you described,
right.
The parent who seems to do everything right and their kid walks away, or the parent who doesn't seem to even try and they have a missionary kid, a rock star kid. Those are the things that get our attention. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, they are not indicative of the vast majority of students. The vast majority of students will end up looking just like mom and dad. And so at the end of the day, if you want your kids to love Jesus, you need to love Jesus. It's not a formula. It's not something A equals B, but it's pretty close. It's pretty close. Richard Ross, I'll give him credit for this. He has said that if you boil all of parenting down to one sentence, it would be this: love God and love your kids. And if we do that, we get away from all of the things that the nuances that scare us to death. Should I do family worship? Should we memorize scripture? Should we have a prayer time? Should we do this? Should we do that? And really, it's about the attitude of the heart for the parent. It's not just about their actions, because at the end of the day, your kids are going to see you for who you really are, not for what you do. And so they're picking up your priorities. And boy, I get it with the sports. I have the 4 kids I have, my 2 boys, they played a lot of sports, and we were at those games. And you have to work to say, look, man, I love you, and I love that you're playing the sport. I played sports. I think it's great. We love playing sports. I loved going out when my sons were playing baseball or football or golf or whatever they were doing. I got to walk with my son played high school golf, and I got to walk the course with him. And man, it was awesome. I loved it. But at the end of the day, is that the most important thing? What do you want for your child when they're in their 20s and 30s and 40s? Do you really think they're going to be a professional athlete? Well, if you do, research or statistics would say you're wrong. They're just not probably going to be. So do we waste all that time devoting ourselves to sports? And I don't say waste as in it's a bad thing, but waste if it consumes our life.
Sure.
When church and the Lord and that walk with God is what we really want for our kids, or what I hope we want for our kids.
That's good.
And so, yeah, you're right. At the end of the day, kids end up looking like their parents. And so as moms and dads, we need to just, grab onto that. I always tell parents that's good news and bad news. The good news is, right, okay, I know what I need to do. I need to love the Lord. I need to do that. The bad news is I got to get my spiritual act together.
Right.
And I need to just focus on my own love for the Lord. The easiest way to help a son or a daughter do something or create a behavior in them is to value that as a parent. Talk to them about it. The best way to get a child to stop doing a bad behavior is to talk to them about it. So parents are influential. The lie of the enemy is this: you've lost your influence. They're more influenced by their peers. They're more influenced by the culture. They're more influenced by media. You've lost your influence. Your kids don't help with that. I mean, my kids didn't. They would roll their eyes. Oh, Dad, come on. And I'll be honest, they still do that a little bit. But, that kind of makes you think they don't listen to me. They don't care what I think. But that is not true. And so I would just scream at the top of my lungs, moms and dads, they're watching you. They're listening to you. Even in high school, they're watching you to see how to be an adult, what kind of adult they need to be.
Gosh, that is good advice. A little teary-eyed over here just listening to that. You have not lost your influence. I think every parent needed to hear that. That's good. Is this let me ask you, you've been on church staff for a while. Is this nuanced for staff kids? What's it like? You've had kids of your own raised in the church, and on some levels there's maybe expectations or what is this conversation nuanced? Or is there anything special that you would say to church staffers that have kids that are growing up in the ministry, and you're doing your discipleship at home, but also there's the dad's on staff, mom's on staff? Is that nuanced?
Yeah, I really think it is. We hear the stories, the horror stories of the pastor's kid, of just run wild in the church and all that. I think the danger for us on staff is for our Christianity to become our vocation. And we have to be careful that church is not just a job for us.
That's good.
Every student, every child, every adolescent deals with this. Is my parents' vocation taking away their attention and their focus and their energy and their love of me? Are they giving more to that job than they're giving to me? When that's the church, it just makes it all the harder. And so as a staff member, I have to be even more intentional about saying, okay, I work at the church, but even if I didn't work there, we would go, and here's why. Here's the value of the church. More than a paycheck, the value of the church is the people we see, the people we know, the encouragement we get, the prayer we receive, the phone calls, the emails, all the things that go into being a family. As a staff member, we have to be even more intentional in that, because that competitiveness of I am a child competing with the church for my parent, the enemy can really use that. And so as staff members, we just have to be extra careful of what we're giving up. I think at the end of the day, and we hear this a lot, but it's very true. At the end of the day, I want to be known as a good dad and a good husband more than I want to be known as a good minister. And so if a late night might make me look like a good minister, but it doesn't help me as a dad, it may not be worth it.
That's good.
And that's where you have to go to a church. And fortunately, you and I both are at a church where they value that. Mm-hmm. And that makes a big difference.
Yeah. Well, I will tell you one thing that I'm thankful for, and for those who might be listening outside of kind of our context, we're a multi-site church. Doug and I work at the same church, different campuses. And so my campus pastor, Malcolm Marshall, he beats the drum of self-care and work-life balance every week, in and out. And he is a hard worker. But when it's time to take time off, I think it was last week, he said, "Hey, you were burning the candle at both ends and you need to take some time off." And my family will never say no to that. And I'm thankful to have a pastor who pays attention to that. I know that's the heart of our senior pastor, Greg Mott, who I don't get to see very often, just because he's at a different campus, and I see Malcolm all the time. But I know that's the heart of our church. And it might be worth saying that if there's someone on church staff in a different context where that's maybe not a value, it's worth paying attention to. Maybe that culture is not healthy. Maybe that's not the place you want to be. So that is really, really great advice. Doug, who, just last question I have, because you're giving us all kinds of insight. Who are the people you're learning from? Where are you getting all this from? And who are you learning from? Who's influencing you? Who's inspiring you?
The student minister in me really wants to say Jesus.
Of course.
No, we're very fortunate in 2022 to have some great thinkers in the world of parenting, spiritual formation in the family, and that type of thing. And so, guys like Tim Elmore, Dr. Tim Elmore has such an incredible grasp on the difference in generations, Generation Z versus Generation Y, which is millennials. What is going on spiritually with that group? How do we reach them? I would say he targets some of what he does for parents and some of his for educators and ministers. And so you got to kind of find the right resource for you. But he has a lot of good things to say. I always come back to Richard Ross, who's devoted his life to the family and to parenting teenagers well. I mean, for 50 plus years, he's been doing that. And he has a ton of books out there that just are very helpful on doing that. Rob Reno and his wife, Amy, have really become, about the last 10 years, a very strong voice in parenting in general, not just with teenagers, but even with younger kids. They have a lot of really good resources. And so try to lean into them. We have a pastor in our own town, Brian Haynes, who has written a few books on parenting and really has a good grasp on this, and the way that parenting works in the home and leveraging the influence that we have as parents is really good. And then to be honest, probably an organization that has really connected well for us is Randall House and the D6 movement, if you will. I don't know if they want me to call them a movement, but at least the D6 organization. Randall House is a publishing company, but they've really devoted themselves to publishing faith at home type things. And Ron Hunter, who leads D6 and Randall House, it really has a heart for this. And they're putting out a lot of material especially that's helpful for parents. And so if I were a parent and I was looking for a resource, one of the first places I would go is the D6, d6.com, I think is what it is, and just look at their store. There's so many resources there for moms and dads. And I would say this, in the midst of all that, you can get lost. You know, Tim Elmore has a newsletter, and Richard Ross has books, and Brian Haynes and Robert, you know, all these people have so many things going on. I just want to come back to this. At the end of the day, nothing is greater than our own relationship with the Lord.
It's good.
And God wants us to parent out of the overflow of our heart, and not just do what we read on a page. Now, hopefully what we read on a page encourages us to lean into the Lord, to trust the Lord. We can't control the lives of our kids. It can be a very fearful job to parent a child. But at the end of the day, we have to trust the Lord with our kids. That becomes so very real when they graduate from high school and then they go away to college. And, you know, I have 4 kids, and I can tell you what states they're in right now, but that's about it. I don't know where they are. I don't know who they're with. I don't know what they're doing. And I have to trust God with that. And so as parents, when we parent, it's really about learning to trust God with our kids, and trust that He knows what He's doing and He can take care of them. And so just to help moms and dads take a little pressure off, I would say God's greater than our mistakes.
Oh, that's good.
So we do the best that we can, and that will be good enough, because God in the end is the ultimate parent, and He knows what He's doing. And so He comes behind us. He's our safety net. When we get it wrong, and we all do. No, there's no perfect parents. We just trust God to be the one that works them through. I've seen God do things in the lives of my kids as adults that I just totally screwed up as a parent, and He still has been able to teach them and help them and grow them. And so you don't do it alone. God really takes care of you, but we lean into that, and He does a great job of it.
That's good. Well, let's pray and go home. Gosh, that's all I needed today.
Well,
that's
thank you, Mark.
Right,
I just want to say, brother, I appreciate you so much. You are doing such an incredible job at your campus. You are so good with kids. I've done this long enough to know who's the real deal, and you're the real deal, brother. And I'm proud of you, and I'm proud to know you. So thank you for letting me be a part of this.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you. Thank you for your influence. Thank you for the kind words, and appreciate you being our first guest. This is great. So
I love it.
Thanks
Yeah,
for what you
fun.
do, man.